oh my God, have you seen this? This is hilarious. Let's call these girls over, you know, for whatever. And then it gets out of control and becomes a mess. We have prostitution issues all the time in Portsmouth. And regardless of your feelings on whether some people think, hey, it's a waste of police time, it should be legalized. The way it is now, it comes with guns, it comes with drugs. Every time we've done a sting, we've taken drugs out, we've taken weapons out. A lot of times there are some organized crime involvement, organized crime being the gangs out of Lawrence and Lowell that control most of this money. And we had a child trafficking case where they were trafficking a 13-year-old girl up, and that was right at the Portsmouth traffic circle. So there's a huge prostitution network that comes right through this area. It's not quite as, it's not exactly like Pretty Woman. So. Back to my slide here. So one of the things to know is Craigslist, you know, you should be looking at your history on your computer to see where your kid is going. And if your 16-year-old son is spending ample amounts of time on Craigslist, that might be an area for concern. Find out who your child's friends are. Find out who they're talking to. Take the time to expand that list of friends. And besides just going, oh my God, it's a mind-numbing list to get through, take the time to go through it and see who it is they're talking to, who they're hooked up with, and why. One of the other big things is parental liability and mandatory reporter status that comes with this. Anytime we develop reason to believe that a child's in danger in their home, we're mandatory reporters. We have to report that to DCYF, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and they do an investigation. You are all mandatory reporters, because the statute reads any police officer, teacher, blah, 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 lists all these professions, and at the end says, or any other person. Well, I don't know why they list it, but it applies to all of us. So when you see things online, you have to take action by law. There's also the issue of kids posting pictures of drinking and it happening in somebody's home. There's huge liability, criminal liability with that for hosting an underage drinking party. There's huge civil liability. Somebody gets hurt or drinks too much or something happens in your home, your homeowner's insurance is probably going to, or you're going to get sued. So those are all areas of concern that we have to look at. You know, there are over 300 plus sites that are out there. So you can't know all the sites. You can't police all your kids' activity online. And that would be overwhelming. So my recommendation is you start with just that basic ground level talk of, let's talk about posting for your 30s, right? Which they think is a million years away. And you talk about smart things, smart decision making, and talk about having that time delay before loading things to think about what they're doing. You know, it's like all the emails I've sent from work where I hit send and it felt really good to hit send. And then 5 minutes later I'm reading the policy on how we can pull back emails, right? And we've all usually had that moment. So getting your kids to understand that once you put it online, because of the terms of service, you just lost your rights to it. There is no pulling that back. Even if you delete it, it's there forever, potentially. And then going through some of these dangers that we've talked about. Understanding that acquiring drugs and alcohol is just extremely easy now. More so than it was before, because they can go on Craigslist and get home delivered, you know, home shopping delivery, which translates to I'll buy your beer and bring it to your house. We had a case where right behind Portsmouth High School, a guy was showing up on Fridays, popping the trunk and offloading his bags of booze to kids. He was like, I think he was like 50 years old, and he was making some decent money doing it. The good news here is that you can also be proactive and you can find what these people are into. The kids are not really sneaky. You know, we had a group of kids that were doing cocaine or selling cocaine a couple of years ago in the high school, and then go and buy crack in Lawrence and bring it back up here. And they put on their Facebook or MySpace at the time, they're like, tripping down to Lawrence on Friday, we'll have lots of goodies on Saturday. So, you know, it wasn't exactly brain surgery to make that case. But the point is that they have that perception that people aren't watching. So if you take time and you just take your kid and say, I'm just going to look at their main site, their Facebook site. They might be on all sorts of other little side sites, but look at their main site and see how are they presenting themselves. Who are they talking to? What are they talking about? That little bit of prevention is going to be huge. I realize I'm flying through this, but I don't have a lot of time. You know, some basic other dangers which we hear about all the time in the news. 1 in 5 kids online are going to be approached by a predator. That's pretty scary statistic. False sites, pornography, phishing for personal info for identity theft. That happens a lot. One of the things we were seeing was a logout screen where it says, oops, you've been logged off of Facebook. And kids don't miss a beat and they go log back on. But all it was a pop-up that looked like Facebook. Now it's got their name, their password. So if something happens, talk to them about looking at that the URL, the address line, making sure it is actually Facebook that they're talking to. Gang and hate group recruitment is all over all these social networking sites. Everybody's marketing. Cyberbullying is another big thing, and I realize there's specific talks on that. But cyberbullying is huge. One of the issues that we're seeing with that is just the difference between what we all grew up with, the seeing bullying or being part of bullying or whatnot, and it lasts in the moment, and sure, people may talk about it a few days later. Now having it preserved so that it takes on a life of its own, so people can like the comment, people can comment on the comment, and thus it just has this continuing cycle. And I think that's part of why we're seeing it affect young adults so much more than it affected prior generations. And of course, the ramifications from bullying can be disastrous, as we see. Backpage is another one. I'm going to blow through some of these, but Backpage, if your kids are on Backpage, there's probably no really good reason for them to be there. It's a really popular site, though. It's kind of modeled after Craigslist, but it's a whole lot darker. It's Craigslist sort of to the extreme. Twitter. Not too much about Twitter. All right, so here's one of the advertising things that's right online. It pops right up. This is the KKK's MySpace application. They don't have any hate speech in here, so, and you'd be surprised to know, a lot of your kids have no idea who the Klan is. They don't know. Kids growing up, if you ever see those shows where they interview kids on the sidewalk, or not even kids, adults on the sidewalk, and ask them questions about World War II, and they're like, people have no clue. So if your kid has just seen this, and there's no hate speech, and it says, hey, it's the original Boys in the Hood, here's our little membership application that's this long, you hit enter. They don't know what it is, they do it, see what it is, maybe it's something cool, they're bored, and then they see what it is and they freak out. Well, what matters? What matters is that their name and all their information is somewhere sitting on a server as having applied to their local Klan group. Kids have to hear the message, not so much about the Klan, but about knowing what you're hitting send and sending your information to. Learn about the groups that you like. It's the other thing, all these groups that you can like online. Find out who runs the group. What's the agenda? A lot of political action groups are setting up little memberships online so that they can say, we have over 50,000 members online. A lot of those are people who have no clue what they're doing. They don't understand what they're joining. Make sure your kid isn't one of those people that has just added themselves on here. The Crips have always done a lot of recruiting online. They have a whole site where they have each rap star today, like Snoop Dogg and all these different guys who are popular, and then they have a sort of a line to which section of the Crips they were in, like the Rollin' 20s. Snoop Dogg started in the Rollin' 20s. And the message is clear. If you want to get here, if you want to have this legitimacy, if you want to be one of these MTV superstars, well, you have to have that legitimate background. And it's just, it's brilliant marketing. And even though we don't have a gang problem in Portsmouth, we get kids that still try to emulate that lifestyle, and we get problems from that. A little bit more about bullying. So bullying, and we see this all the time locally. This is, we have one school resource officer right now, and he bounces between the high school and middle school. Starting next year, we'll have 2 school resource officers, 1 for the high school and 1 for the middle school, which is huge. We used to have 3, then we got down to 0. And we've just, this year, put our first one back in, and now with a partnership with the school where they're going to match half the funds, we're going to be able to afford to put a second one in. And that's big because our school resource officers deal with the bullying stuff constantly. And the key to bullying is early intervention. And when you have that kid come home and they're telling you about stuff that's happened, the answer can't be, anymore, hey, sticks and stones, walk away from it. Because it doesn't work that way. It's not the same as when we were growing up, like I talked about. You have to latch on to the stuff that they say. If they have that ability to actually take the time to tell you about it, it's a big deal. If they're telling you about it, it's a big deal. At the very least, contact the school, speak to their homeroom teacher, to the guidance counselor, somebody, kind of get that loop going so somebody's watching, somebody's paying attention to what's going on. When we look at school shootings, and I'm not making any excuse for school shooters, but understanding the problem, you have to look at what one of the causes are. And bullying is a huge cause. The majority of school shootings out there, the kids have left behind these manifestos and other things talking about why they're doing it. When we look at the fact that since 1993 there have been more than 85 school shootings in the US, just since Sandy Hook there have been 8 school shootings just through the end of January. So we think of Sandy Hook, it's huge and horrible, and of course it was. People don't even hear about it. There's been 8 more since then in our country. It's horrific, it's an epidemic, it is all over the place. And it's interesting and horrifying, it's a United States epidemic. It happens randomly in Europe and other places, but nowhere like the US. And if you want to learn more about that, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman is pretty much the expert on that stuff. He has a website called killology.com, and it's pretty amazing what he looks at. And his theory, he traces a lot of it back to screen time, back to the video games that, you know, train kids from a very early age to kill people. And that takes away sort of some of that fear. And you know, when I was a new police officer, I've been a cop for about 16 years. I remember we would drive with my training officer, and you'd go by, you know, store 24, and be like, okay, you look over, and there's a guy in front of the counter, and he's got a shotgun. He goes, that's what you got to do. You got to look over, see that in your head, and now play it out. What would you do? Where would you park? Would you go in? Would you not go in? Would you call? Would you? And you go through this exercise, and he was talking about it. It's like your brain now doesn't know the difference in some ways. Your brain has now been through that. So when you do drive by and you see something crazy, it's not the first time, and you're not doing the deer in the headlights because you've played through these roles in your head. There are video games out there with kids beating up women, killing prostitutes, beheading police officers, like just horrific stuff. And these are, I'm not talking about creepy, weird games you find in some dark corner of the web. I'm talking about go to Foxford Mall, to the video game store, and look at the games that are on there. There's some brutal, graphic stuff. And our kids from a very early age have been playing them and getting indoctrinated into it, and their brains have gone through that process where they've now done this stuff. And where is that the cause? Who the hell knows? It's not my area of expertise, but he makes a pretty convincing argument for it. And when you look at the statistics, what you will come away with is that we have a huge problem. How you get to how we have that problem, you know, everybody can have an opinion on, but it's something you got to think about. And one of the causes is certainly bullying. I spoke to a group in Texas, and I talked to an athletic director who was the athletic director for one of the schools that had one of the major school shootings that everybody would recognize the name of. And he talked about in his school, the culture was football. So the football team could do no wrong. And on game day, which is, you know, the same for most schools, you wear your game jersey on Fridays, not a big deal. But in their school, the football team would link arms walking down the hall and trample people, knock kids to the side, knock books out of hands. It was just, and so kids knew, oh gosh, here comes the football team. It was like, you know, everybody moved to the side and they'd go by. And teachers all saw it, and nobody did anything. Because the math teacher couldn't do something, because that was the culture of the school. If the math teacher stepped up, the school administration wouldn't back that teacher, and how many times is that teacher going to do that, right? They're not going to do it. So the culture was, well, it's just, you know how it is, you turn a blind eye to it. And that was one of the things that was pointed at as these kids being tormented by the football team and by other kids. And they, you know, they were, there's a theory out there called fragile children. Of some children can handle a certain level of this stuff, and there's some kids that just cannot deal with this. Don't have the coping skills, don't have those mechanisms, and if they're subjected to this, they're more likely to a stress reaction to react violently. But luckily here in Portsmouth, at least, you don't have that in our schools. We have bullying, but we have it on the level that every school has it. You know, we have kids acting badly. We do huge early intervention. We get in there when anything happens, usually involve the parents and everybody else, and bring an end to it. New Hampshire has a bullying law. A lot of people think that means you can get arrested for bullying. You can't. It's not one of those type of laws. What the New Hampshire law deals with is reporting. When the schools have to report to who, how often. Really what it does is it sets up a yardstick of responsibility for lawsuits, for civil suits. It doesn't really do anything as far as holding people accountable for getting arrested. And I just bring that up because we hear all the time people saying, well, why didn't they get arrested? Let's see, what do I have for time? I'm going to skip over Joe is a jerk. And jump to best practices. So some best practices for this stuff. I have where to put the computer. We all know now we're not just talking about computers. We're talking about cell phones. We're talking about any device that gets internet. The ability to maintain some control of that is really important. And when you take, I always pick on the 16-year-old boy, who's got this doorway, all sorts of things he's not supposed to be looking at, and you allow that to exist in his room, and you expect that at 2 in the morning he's not going to open up that computer and look around or get involved in stuff. It's a little bit naive. I would say don't put the computer in a kid's room. Keep the computers in common areas. And people talk about, well, I trust my kids. You say, well, that's brilliant. You should also give them the keys to your car and maybe a copy of your credit card just to help build on that trust. And of course, people go, well, no, I would never do that. Say, okay, well, then take away the issue of trust. It's not about trust. It's about helping your kids be safe. Same reasons you wouldn't give them the keys to the car whenever they want. Same reasons you don't give them a credit card, because their job is to make silly decisions. It's just part of what they're going to do. So they're going to do it here. Make it a little more difficult for them. Make it easier for you to have some intervention. The grandma rule is what one family came up with, whose grandmother lived with them. Their thing was, if the computer is somewhere where grandma might come ambling by, kids are going to be on better sites, because grandma may smack them in the back of the head if they're not. And just that general thought that it's in a central area, more people have eyes on it, is important. The cell phone getting unplugged at the end of the night and getting charged in a different location. Whether that location is the kitchen, or whether your kids are going to go down and get it, then maybe that location becomes your parents' room. And there's varying degrees. I've talked to families who say, yep, 8 o'clock at night, they're off the computer, and I actually take the power cord, and it comes to bed with me, it goes to my room, because they need to do it to that level. Other families can just have that rule, and they feel that just having the rule is enough, and that's obviously kid dependent. But check the history on the computer. See when they're going online, what sites they're going to. And if the history is wiped out, that's not like, oh good, look, there was nothing bad. That means they erased the history. As I've had to explain to several parents who are like, no, I always check the history and he doesn't go on anything. Like, wow, that is convenient. Work on using this to build trust with your kids. I talk about sitting down with them with Facebook. But if you say, hey, Wednesday, we're going to sit down and we're going to go over your Facebook site, there is value to that. But that's, there's some limited value to that, right? Because what are they going to do? Well, they're going to hopefully go through their site before Wednesday. There needs to be times where you go, let's log on now. Let's see what's on there. You also need to have access to their site. And I know a lot of kids are not going to want to give up their password to you. And so, one idea is that they can keep their passwords private, but they have to write it on an envelope, gets sealed, gets put on the top of the fridge, and you spot check it with them. You open it up, you sit down, you log in, you make sure it works, you go through their stuff, and every so often they can change the password and put a new one up there. But the idea is if you ever need to have that emergency where you have to get online, you have to see who they were talking to, where they were going, what was going on with them. You have that ability to do that, and that's important. The other great thing about going through their sites with them, you're going to become more comfortable and familiar with these sites. You're going to learn more about your kids and what they're into, in a good way, not what they're into in negative stuff. It's a chance to generate discussions. It can be, a really good thing. It can also be a really horrible thing if the first thing you see you don't like, you flip the table over and go crazy. So you have to prepare yourself that you may not find all the things they find funny. Talk to them about who they add as a friend. And we put up these general guidelines, which are like sort of the nationally endorsed guidelines of who to add. People in your age group, people close in geography, people you already know, friends, family, classmates. You could probably categorize these 4 sections as just boring. Your kids are going to go, oh, good. I get to add everybody I already know. Well, that's why I want to be part of this big international network, right? So that's boring. But what they need to know is if this is the safer thing to do, when they step out of that and add the new 16-year-old in California, who, of course, we all know could be any age, could be anybody at all, they're stepping out of that safety zone. So if they choose to do that, that's fine. But now they have to be cognizant of the fact When the new 16-year-old goes, oh man, I really like your site, it's really cool. Do you have any more pictures of yourself to send? That sets off that alarm of how many of their 16-year-old friends are asking them for photos of themselves. But if they haven't already heard that from you, believe it or not, if you haven't waved that flag for them of saying, it's concerning if anybody's asking you to upload or send them more photos, even just normal photos. That's often how it starts. That's that grooming behavior we see. Send photos. Tell me about personal stuff. Oh, I hear your parents are divorced. My parents went through a divorce. It was really hard. Blah, blah, blah. Building that trust network. In many of our internet crime cases that we work, the kids were obstructionists in our cases. They did everything they could to stop our case, even when we told them, you're not talking to another kid. This is an adult. This is a sexual predator. This person is after you for one reason. Kids didn't buy it. Because they built entire relationships. And these people are brilliant for the most part that do that grooming stuff. They get right in the kid's head, and we have kids trying to warn the people. And it didn't happen once or twice. This is like a trend that happens, and we talk about in our national conferences across the country. Kids become obstructionists. It's that sort of brainwashing theory. But help them understand right up front, and use those recent examples of sports athletic stars that have gotten sucked in to having friends online that turned out to be somebody completely different. Use examples that they're going to be able to relate to. Who don't you add as a friend? People out of the age range. If I went on my kid's site and found that they're friends with the 36-year-old dude who lives down the road, that 36-year-old dude would have a whole lot of problems. Because there's just no good reason in my opinion for that. The other thing is, I talk to teachers. Teachers have a tough job, and sometimes, especially when they see young adults who are struggling and have no family support network, the teacher will think, well, it's okay to add them as a friend to their Facebook page. I think it's a horrible idea to have kids becoming friends with their teachers online. And it's kind of part of a national discussion that people have in that field.